You are sitting at a desk you do not recognize, in a building you have never seen before, and the fluorescent light above you is buzzing in a rhythm that sounds almost like breathing, almost like waiting. Your fingers are on a keyboard that is not yours, typing numbers into a spreadsheet you do not remember opening, and without knowing how you know that you are not alone in this room. There is someone standing behind your chair. You can feel the absence of warmth where a body should be. You can feel the stillness. You do not turn around. You keep typing. The numbers blur. The breathing gets closer. A voice, soft, familiar in a way that makes your stomach drop, says the same words it always says. You are tired. You are so tired. And then the hands settle on your shoulders, and they are cold, and they are real, and you finally understand that this is not a dream. This was never a dream. This is just what happens when you run out of places to hide. Caleb Merritt had never been the kind of man who believed in ghosts. He believed in quarterly reports. He believed in compound interest and credit scores and the quiet satisfaction of a spreadsheet that balanced perfectly on the first try. At 32, he had built a life in Columbus, Ohio, that felt solid in the way only carefully managed things can feel solid. He lived in a 2-bedroom condo in the Brewery District, the kind of exposed brick and a balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs and a small table where he drank his coffee every morning at exactly 6:15. He ran 4 miles on the Olentangy Trail every Tuesday and Thursday. He called his mother every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon, and he never missed. He had a routine. He had a plan. He had a future that looked, from every angle, like success. What he did not have, and what he told himself he did not need, was a clear memory of who he had been at 22. That version of Caleb had been different. That Caleb had been arrogant in a careless way of young men who have never been told no by anyone who mattered. That Caleb had gone to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and a full sense of entitlement. That Caleb had joined a fraternity not because he cared about brotherhood, but because he liked the way it looked when he walked into a room and people already knew his name. That Caleb had done things he preferred not to think about now, things he had buried so deep beneath spreadsheets and morning runs and carefully constructed respectability that he had almost convinced himself they had happened to someone else. Almost, the job offer came through a connection he had nearly forgotten. A woman named Dana Whitfield, someone he had known briefly in his senior year, had seen his resume on a professional networking site and sent him a message that was polite in the way of people who are choosing their words very carefully. She said she was working at a financial consulting firm in the short north, a small company called Whitfield and Associates that was expanding its team. She said they needed someone with his background in corporate finance. She said she remembered how sharp he had always been with numbers. Caleb did not remember Dana Whitfield being sharp with numbers. He remembered her being quiet. He remembered her sitting in the back of their investment analysis class, her hair always pulled back in a way that made her look younger than she was. He remembered the party, the one he did not let himself think about, and he remembered that she had been there, though the details of what had happened to her had blurred in his memory into something shapeless and uncomfortable, something he had filed away under the general category of college mistakes. He took the job anyway. The salary was better than he expected. The office was in a renovated warehouse on High Street, the kind of space that tried very hard to look industrial and casual at the same time. Exposed ductwork, polished concrete floors, a kitchen area with a single-serve coffee machine, and a refrigerator that someone kept stocked with sparkling water. On his first day, Dana showed him around with a professionalism that gave nothing away. She introduced him to the team, showed him where the conference rooms were, explained the client management system with the patience of someone who had done this many times before. She did not mention the party. She did not mention college at all. She treated him like a stranger, and Caleb told himself that was a relief. His desk was in an open-plan area near the back of the floor, close to a window that looked out over a parking lot, and beyond it, the gray slate roof of a church that had been converted into apartments. The desk next to his belonged to a man named Marcus who worked in tax strategy and who spent most of the day on phone calls with clients, his voice a constant low murmur that Caleb learned to tune out within the first week. The desk across from his was empty. Someone had left a coffee mug there, white ceramic with a company logo faded almost to nothing, and a small succulent in a pot that had not been watered in long enough for the soil to look like dust. When Caleb asked about the empty desk, Marcus looked up from his computer with an expression Caleb could not quite read. That was Dana's old desk, Marcus said. Before she moved to the corner office, Caleb nodded and let it go. He had work to do. He had clients to impress and reports to file, and a reputation to build in a city where he was still, despite everything, relatively unknown. He threw himself into the work with the same intensity he applied to his morning runs, arriving early, staying late, volunteering for projects that no one else wanted. Within a month, the senior partners were mentioning his name in meetings. Within 2, he was being given accounts that had previously belonged to people with twice his experience. He told himself he was happy. He told himself this was the life he had been working toward. He told himself that the empty desk across from him was just an empty desk, that the coffee mug was just a coffee mug, that the faint smell of jasmine that sometimes drifted through the office when no one was wearing perfume was just the ventilation system pulling in something from the street outside. He told himself these things because the alternative was not something he was prepared to consider. The first sign came on a Thursday in late October, the kind of gray afternoon when the light seems to drain out of the sky hours before it should. Caleb was working late, as he often did, the office empty except for the security guard downstairs and the occasional sound of a car passing on High Street. He was reviewing a portfolio analysis for a client in Cincinnati, his eyes moving across rows of numbers that had started to blur together when he heard the sound of a keyboard clicking. It was not his keyboard. His fingers were still on his own keys, frozen mid-keystroke. The sound was coming from the empty desk across from him, from the chair that no one had sat in since he started, and for a moment Caleb thought it must be his imagination, the auditory equivalent of seeing spots after staring at a screen too long. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes. The clicking stopped. He went back to work. 10 minutes later, it started again. A steady, rhythmic tapping, the sound of someone typing with purpose, the kind of sound that suggested real work being done, not the random noise of an old building settling. Caleb looked up. The chair was still empty. The desk was still bare except for the faded mug and the withered succulent. But the sound was unmistakable. Someone was typing at that desk. He could hear it as clearly as he could hear his own breathing. He stood up. He walked around to the other side of the desk, close enough to touch the back of the empty chair, and the clicking stopped the moment his hand brushed the fabric. The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of someone holding their breath. Caleb went home early that night. He told himself he was just tired. He told himself the building was old and full of strange acoustics. He told himself that Marcus had probably been working remotely and left his computer on, that the sound was coming through speakers somewhere, that there was a rational explanation for everything if he just thought about it hard enough. He did not sleep well. He kept waking up with the feeling that someone was standing at the foot of his bed, watching him, though every time he opened his eyes the room was empty and the shadows were just shadows. The next morning, he came in to find a paper cup of coffee on his desk. Black, no sugar, exactly the way he drank it. He assumed it was from Dana, a gesture of welcome or perhaps an acknowledgement that she had been thinking about him, and he drank it without question. It was only later, when he saw her in the hallway and thanked her, that he realized something was wrong. Dana looked at him with an expression that was not quite confusion and not quite concern, something closer to careful neutrality. "I did not bring you coffee," she said. "I have not been upstairs yet this morning." Caleb laughed it off. He said someone must have left it for him by mistake. He said it was probably Marcus, though Marcus only drank energy drinks and had never once offered to buy coffee for anyone. He said these things with a lightness in his voice that sounded false even to him, and he watched Dana's face as she listened, watched the way her eyes moved across his face as if she was looking for something specific, something she had seen there once before and was trying to find again. She did not say anything else. She just nodded and walked away, and Caleb stood in the hallway with the taste of coffee still in his mouth and the sudden, inexplicable certainty that he had made a terrible mistake by coming here. But he did not leave. He could not leave. The job was too good, the salary too necessary, the future he was building too important to walk away from because of a few strange noises and a cup of coffee he could not explain. He was a rational man. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in hard work and perseverance and the power of the human mind to explain away anything that did not fit within the boundaries of the reasonable world. He stayed. And things got worse. The typing sounds became more frequent, no longer limited to late nights but appearing at random moments throughout the day. Always from the empty desk, always stopping the moment Caleb tried to locate the source. He started seeing movement in his peripheral vision, shapes that vanished when he turned his head, shadows that seemed to detach from the walls and drift across the floor before dissolving into nothing. The smell of jasmine grew stronger, clinging to his clothes, following him home, filling his condo until he could not enter a room without feeling like he was walking into someone else's presence. He told no one. What would he say? That he was hearing typing in an empty office? That he smelled flowers that did not exist? They kept finding small objects move from where he had left them, his pen on the wrong side of his desk, his coffee mug turned to face the wall, his chair pushed in when he knew he had left it pulled out. These were not the kinds of things a rational man reported. These were the kinds of things that got you labeled as unstable, as unreliable, as someone who could not handle the pressure of a demanding job. He kept his mouth shut and he worked harder, as if productivity could outpace fear, as if the sheer volume of his output could drown out the voice that was starting to whisper at the edges of his hearing, a voice that sounded like a woman speaking too softly to make out the words, a voice that seemed to be saying his name. A voice spoke from the darkness. It was not loud. It was not threatening. It was soft, almost gentle, the voice of someone who had been waiting a very long time to say something they had rehearsed in their mind 1,000 times. You are tired, the voice said. You look so tired, Caleb. Caleb knew that voice. He had known it the moment it spoke, though he had not heard it in 10 years, though he had done everything in his power to forget it existed. It was the voice of a woman he had known in college, a woman he had heard in ways he had never allowed himself to fully examine, a woman whose name he had trained himself not to think about because thinking about it made him feel something he did not have a name for. Her name was Emily. Emily Vance. She had been in his investment analysis class, sitting in the back with her hair pulled back, quiet and serious, and so completely outside the orbit of his social world that he had barely noticed her until the night of the party, the night he had done something that he had spent the last decade pretending was just a mistake, just a moment of poor judgment, just the kind of thing that happened at college parties when everyone had too much to drink. He had not seen her after that night. She had dropped out of the class. She had stopped coming to campus. He had heard months later that she had transferred to another school, that she had struggled with depression, that she had eventually ended her own life in the apartment she rented alone, surrounded by textbooks she would never finish and notes she would never take. He had told himself it was not his fault. He had told himself that her choices were her own, that he was not responsible for the decisions other people made, that college was full of difficult moments and everyone had to find their own way through. He had told himself these things so many times that they had become a kind of truth, a wall he had built around the memory of that night so that he could walk past it every day without seeing what was on the other side. But the wall was gone now. The voice in the darkness had torn it down with 2 words, and Caleb could see everything he had hidden, everything he had refused to look at, everything he had convinced himself did not matter, because it had happened so long ago, and he was a different person now. The lights came back on. Not gradually, not with the flickering hesitation of a bulb warming up, but all at once, a sudden blast of fluorescent white that made Caleb flinch and shield his eyes. When he lowered his hand, the chair across from him was empty. The desk was bare. The mug and the succulent sat exactly where they had always sat, unchanged, untouched. But on his own keyboard, in the document he had been working on, someone had typed a single sentence in a font he did not recognize, in a color that was not quite black, in words that seemed to pulse with their own light against the white background of the screen. "Do you remember what you said to me?" the sentence read. "Do you remember what you said would never matter?" You are sitting there now, in your own darkness, reading those words, and you feel them land in your chest like stones dropped into still water. You remember. You remember everything. You remember the party and the room, and the way she looked at you with trust in her eyes, with a naive belief that you were the person you pretended to be. You remember the moment that trust broke, the exact second when her expression shifted from confusion to fear to something worse than fear, something that looked like the end of hope. You remember your own voice, cruel and careless, saying things you had rehearsed without knowing you were rehearsing them. The words of a man who had learned early that the best defense was to attack first, to make the other person so small that their pain could not reach you. You remember walking out of that room and leaving her there. You remember going back to the party and laughing with your friends and drinking until the memory blurred into something you could dismiss. You remember hearing months later that she had transferred, that she was struggling, that she was gone, and you remember the feeling that rose in you then, not grief, not guilt, but relief, pure and cold and absolute, the relief of a man who had been given permission to forget, but you cannot forget anymore. The words on the screen will not let you. They sit there, pulsing, waiting, and you understand that this was never about a ghost. This was never about a haunted office or a closed cabin or strange sounds in the dark. This was about the part of you that you buried so deep you thought it had stopped breathing. This was about the moment when the ground you built your life on finally gives way, and you find yourself falling through the floor into a room you thought you had locked forever, and the door is open now. The door has always been open. You just stopped looking at it. Caleb did not go home that night. He sat at his desk until dawn, watching the screen, waiting for the words to change, waiting for the voice to speak again. They did not. The office filled with morning light, with the sounds of people arriving, with the ordinary rhythms of a workday beginning, and Caleb sat in the middle of it all like a man who had been buried alive and was only now realizing that the dirt above him was too heavy to move. Dana found him there at 8 in the morning, still in the same clothes he had worn the day before, his eyes red and hollow, his hands shaking on the keyboard. She did not ask what was wrong. She looked at the screen, at the sentence that was still there, pulsing in that not quite black font, and then she looked at Caleb with an expression that was not surprise and not recognition, but something deeper, something that looked almost like confirmation. "You see her too," Dana said. It was not a question. Caleb looked up at her. For the first time since he had started at this company, he really looked at her, past the professional distance and the careful neutrality, into the person underneath. And he realized that Dana Whitfield was not just someone who had gone to college with him. She was someone who had known Emily Vance. She was someone who had watched what happened in the aftermath, who had seen the way Emily had folded in on herself, who had tried to help and had failed because the damage was too deep and the silence around it was too complete. "She brought you here on purpose," Caleb said. His voice did not sound like his own. It sounded like the voice of a man who had been speaking for hours in an empty room, rough and hollow, and stripped of everything that had once made it confident. Dana did not deny it. She pulled up the empty chair, the one that had been scraping across the floor in the darkness, and she sat down across from him with the patience of someone who had been waiting for this conversation for a very long time. "Emily was my roommate freshman year," Dana said. "She was the kindest person I ever knew. She would have given you everything if you had asked. Instead, you took what you wanted and you told her it was her fault. You told her she was nothing. And she believed you. She believed you so completely that she spent the last 2 years of her life trying to disappear, and when she could not disappear fast enough, she made it permanent." Caleb opened his mouth to speak, to say something, anything, to defend himself or explain himself or beg for forgiveness. But no words came. There were no words for what he had done. There had never been words for it. That was why he had buried it, why he had built a life on top of it, why he had convinced himself that time and distance could transform a crime into a mistake. The office around them was filling with people now, with the sound of computers booting up and coffee being poured and conversations starting in the casual rhythm of a normal Tuesday morning. But at Caleb's desk, in the space between him and Dana, the air was still and heavy, charged with something that had been building for a decade. "She is not here to hurt you," Dana said. "She is here to be seen. She is here because you are the only one who can see her, Caleb. You are the only one who was there that night. You are the only one who knows what really happened. And she will stay until you look at it, until you say it out loud, Until you stopped pretending that her life ended because of something she did and start admitting that it ended because of something you did. Caleb looked at the screen. The words were still there, pulsing, waiting. Do you remember what you said to me? Do you remember what you said would never matter? He remembered. He remembered everything. He remembered the party and the room and the way Emily had looked at him with trust in her eyes, with a naive belief that he was the person he pretended to be. He remembered the moment that trust had broken, the exact second when her expression had shifted from confusion to fear to something worse than fear, something that looked like the end of hope. He remembered his own voice, cruel and careless, saying things he had rehearsed without knowing he was rehearsing them. The words of a man who had learned early that the best defense was to attack first, to make the other person so small that their pain could not reach you. He remembered walking out of that room and leaving her there. He remembered going back to the party and laughing with his friends and drinking until the memory blurred into something he could dismiss. He remembered hearing months later that she had transferred, that she was struggling, that she was gone, and he remembered the feeling that had risen in him then, not grief, not guilt, but relief, pure and cold and absolute, the relief of a man who had been given permission to forget. I remember, Caleb said. The words came out barely above a whisper, but they filled the space between him and Dana like a shout. I remember what I said. I remember what I did. I remember that I left her there, and I told myself it did not matter. I told myself she was fine. I told myself that her life was her own responsibility, and I had nothing to do with what happened to her. The screen flickered. The words faded, not disappearing but dissolving, spreading outward like ink in water until the document was blank again, a white page waiting for something new. Caleb looked up. Dana was watching him with an expression that was not quite forgiveness and not quite condemnation, something that looked like the beginning of understanding, the first crack in a wall that had been standing for too long. What happens now? Caleb asked. Dana stood up. She looked at the empty desk, at the faded mug and the withered succulent, and for a moment Caleb thought he saw something in her face, a softness that had not been there before, a recognition of something that went beyond anger and into grief. Now you live with it, she said. Now you carry it. Not as a secret, not as something buried, but as a truth. Emily is not going to forgive you, Caleb. She is not going to appear in a dream and tell you it is okay. What you did is not okay. It will never be okay. But you can stop running from it. You can stop building your life on top of a grave and pretending the ground is solid. She turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at him with something that might have been pity or might have been simply the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting this battle for longer than he knew. The desk across from you, she said. It was Emily's desk. Not here, but in another office, in another city, in the last job she had before she could not work anymore. She sat at a desk just like that one, typing reports, building a life, trying to be normal, trying to be okay. And every day she sat there, she heard your voice in her head, saying the things you said, telling her she was nothing. Until one day, she could not hear anything else. Caleb sat alone at his desk for a long time after Dana left. The office moved around him, people working, talking, living their lives in the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday morning, and he sat in the middle of it like a stone in a river, feeling the current move past him without being able to move with it. He did not quit his job that day. He did not walk out of the building and disappear. He stayed because leaving would have been another form of running, another way of pretending that the problem was the place and not the person. He stayed, and he did his work, and he tried to be the kind of man who could look at what he had done without looking away. The typing sound stopped after that morning. The smell of jasmine faded gradually, not disappearing all at once but thinning day by day until Caleb could no longer be sure whether he was smelling it or remembering it. The chair across from him remained empty, the mug and the withered succulent undisturbed, a small memorial to a presence that had come and gone without ever fully revealing itself. But Caleb did not forget. He could not forget. The sentence on his screen had burned itself into something deeper than memory, a brand on the part of his mind where he had kept his secrets, his justifications, his carefully constructed innocence. He saw it when he closed his eyes. He heard it in the silence of his condo at night. He carried it with him like a weight that had no shape but had mass, pressing down on his shoulders. making every step feel heavier than the one before. He started going to therapy. He started volunteering at a local crisis center, sitting in rooms with people who were struggling with the same darkness that had swallowed Emily, listening to their stories without trying to fix them, without trying to make their pain smaller so that he could feel more comfortable. He started calling his mother not just on Sundays but throughout the week, not because he had something to say, but because he needed to hear the voice of someone who had known him before he became the person who could do what he did. He did not tell anyone about Emily. Not directly. Not in the way that would have made it real to the people in his life who still believed he was the man he pretended to be. But he carried her with him in the careful way he spoke to people, in the patience he tried to practice, in the space he tried to leave for other people's pain instead of rushing to fill it with his own noise. And every morning, at exactly 6:15, he still sat on his balcony with his coffee at the small table that had once felt like the foundation of a perfect life. But now the ritual was different. Now he sat there not in satisfaction but in acknowledgement, the steam rising from his cup in the cold morning air, and he let himself remember. He let himself feel the weight of what he had done. He let the quiet of that balcony become a space where he could sit with the truth instead of running from it, where the two chairs that had once seemed like an invitation to share his life with someone now felt like a reminder that there was always an empty place at the table, a space reserved for the person he had hurt and the person he was trying to become. Sometimes, late at night, when the office was empty and the fluorescent lights hummed their tune above his desk, Caleb would look across at the empty chair, and he would think he saw something there, a shape in the shadows, a presence that was not quite visible but was not quite gone. And he would sit with it. He would not look away. He would let the silence stretch between them, the silence of two people who had shared something that could not be undone, and he would wait for whatever came next. Nothing ever came. The shape, if it was there, never moved. The voice, if it spoke, never spoke loudly enough for him to hear the words. But Caleb understood, in the way that understanding comes not from thought but from the body, from the place where grief lives, that this was not a haunting in the traditional sense. Emily was not trying to scare him. She was not trying to drive him mad or destroy his life. She was simply there, in the space he had tried to keep empty, reminding him that some debts can never be paid, some wounds can never be healed, some absences can never be filled. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a life after the truth has been spoken. It is not the silence of peace. It is not the silence of resolution. It is the silence of a room after a loud noise is stopped, when your ears are still ringing, and you are not sure whether the quiet means the danger is past or whether it simply means the danger has learned to be still. Caleb Merritt lives in that silence now. He has learned to move through his days with the weight of his acknowledgement always present, not as a burden he carries dramatically, but as a fact he accepts quietly, the way you accept gravity or weather or the slow erosion of stone by water. He does not tell his story to strangers. He does not seek absolution from people who cannot give it. He simply lives, one day at a time, in the space between who he was and who he is trying to become. And here is what he has learned, what this story has taught him, what it might teach you if you let it. We think of hauntings as things that happen in old buildings, in abandoned hospitals, in cemeteries where the ground has forgotten the names of the people buried beneath it. We think of ghosts as the departed returning to trouble the living, as spirits with unfinished business, as supernatural forces beyond our understanding or control. But the truth is simpler and more terrible than that. The truth is that we haunt ourselves. The truth is that the ghosts we fear are not waiting for us in dark rooms or empty hallways. They are waiting for us in the parts of our minds where we store the things we cannot bear to look at. Every one of us has a room like that. A room where we keep the memories we have dressed in softer clothes, the words we have rewritten in kinder voices, the actions we have reframed till they look like misunderstandings instead of choices. We keep that room locked because we are afraid of what will happen if we open the door. We are afraid that if we let the truth out, it will destroy us. We are afraid that if we admit what we did, we will have to become someone else, someone smaller, someone broken, someone beyond redemption. But the room does not stay locked forever. The truth does not stay buried. It finds its way out through the cracks in the foundation, through the gaps in the walls, through the small daily compromises that slowly erode the barriers we have built. It comes out as insomnia. It comes out as anxiety. It comes out as the inexplicable feeling that something is wrong even when everything looks fine, the sense that we are living on top of a hollow space that could give way at any moment. And when it finally breaks through, when the floor gives way, and we find ourselves falling into the room we tried to seal off, we have a choice. We can scramble for the door, desperate to escape, desperate to rebuild the walls, desperate to go back to the life we had before we knew what was underneath it. Or we can stay. We can sit down in the dust and the darkness and we can look at what we have hidden. We can say its name out loud. We can let it be real. That is what Caleb did. That is what this story is about. Not about a ghost in an office. Not about a woman returning from beyond to seek revenge. But about a man who ran out of places to hide, who found himself face to face with the worst thing he had ever done, and who chose finally to stop running. He did not become a good man overnight. He did not become a hero. He did not become someone worthy of forgiveness or praise or redemption. He simply became honest. He became accountable. He became someone who could look at the damage he had caused and say, yes, that was me. I did that. I cannot undo it. I cannot fix it. But I can stop pretending it did not happen. I can stop building my life on top of someone else's pain. And that is the hardest thing any of us can do. It is harder than facing a ghost. It is harder than sitting in a dark office, listening to a keyboard click in an empty chair. It is harder than hearing your name spoken by a voice that should not exist, because it requires us to give up the story we have told ourselves about who we are. It requires us to admit that we are not the protagonist of our own private narratives, that we have hurt people, that we have caused damage that cannot be repaired, that we have been cruel and careless and selfish in ways that have changed the course of other people's lives. IT requires us to sit with that knowledge, not to fix it, not to explain it away, not to drown it in productivity or achievement or to the careful construction of a respectable life, just to sit with it, to let it be true, to let it change us. Caleb still sits on his balcony every morning at 6:15. He still drinks his coffee at the small table that once felt like proof of a successful life. But now the table means something different. Now the empty chair across from him is not an absence waiting to be filled. It is a presence. It is a memorial. It is a quiet acknowledgement that there are some losses that do not end, some griefs that do not resolve, some debts that remain outstanding for as long as we remain alive to owe them. He does not know if Emily is at peace. He does not know if she is anywhere at all. He does not know if the voice he heard in that office was her spirit or his own conscience or some combination of the two that does not have a name in any language he speaks. He knows only that he heard it, that he listened to it, that he let it say what it needed to say. And he knows that the moment he stopped running, the moment he turned around and faced what was behind him, something shifted. Not everything, not enough, but something. That is all any of us can hope for. Not a clean ending, not a happy resolution, not the erasure of what we have done, just the shift, just the moment when we stop being the person who runs and start being the person who stays, just the quiet courage to sit in the dark and listen to the typing and know that we are hearing our own past, our own choices, our own unacknowledged truth, finally finding its way home. The haunting does not end. It never ends. It becomes part of the architecture of who we are, a room in the house of ourself that we cannot close off anymore. But we can learn to live in that house. We can learn to walk through that room without flinching. We can learn to sit with a ghost at the table and drink our coffee in silence. Two people who will never be friends, who will never be forgiven, who will never be free of each other, but who have finally stopped pretending that the other does not exist. That is the way through. That is the only way through. And it is not a path that leads anywhere. It is a path that leads deeper and deeper down into the center of the truth we have spent our lives avoiding. It is dark there. It is quiet there. It is not comfortable. But it is real. And in the end, that is the only place where any of us can truly live. As so if you are sitting in your own darkness right now, If you are hearing your own typing in your own empty room, if you are smelling something that should not be there and feeling a presence that should not exist, do not run. Turn around. Look at what is behind you. Say its name. Let it speak. And then keep living, carrying it with you, letting it make you into someone who can bear the weight of being human in a world where we hurt each other in ways we cannot always see and cannot always fix. That is the horror. And that is the hope. And they are the same thing, seen from different angles, in different lights, at different moments in the long night of a life that is still being written.